Thank you. For our brief recess, we'll call the meeting back to order. Next item is dealing with the Spring Bars Road housing project, and we have Heather McElroy from the Cape Cod Commission. She's going to make a brief presentation, a review of the report that we were given, I think, 2.5 years ago.
That's right. Great, thank you for having me. So yes, I'm Heather McElroy. I'm a natural resource specialist at the Cape Cod Commission. I'm actually pinch hitting for Sarah Korjeff, who coordinated the Commission's work on the Spring Bars Road study. So I was asked to give you just a little bit of an overview of some of the recommendations that the Commission staff made with regard to the affordable housing scenarios on the Spring Bars Road site. And as the chair indicated, we started this project in December 2012, I think, and presented a final report to the town about a year later. Yeah, that would probably help you see things better. Just briefly, the scope of work was meant to look at the Spring Bars Road site, look at the infrastructure needs and resource constraints on the site. Here you see outlined in red the project site area, and then the map here shows the limits of the study area. We also assessed the financial viability of a 30-unit housing proposal. That was the request from the town. And the third sort of major part of our work was looking at the broader study area and recommend any changes or look at opportunities and constraints within the larger area and make recommendations. So I think sort of the focus of the discussion this evening really is around one of the significant resource constraints on this site, which is the firm mapping or the flood zone mapping. What you see in brown here, overlaid the red outline of the project site, is the A zone. It's not the V zone, the velocity zone, which is more significant impacts on development potential on a site. But the A zone will influence the development potential on this site and how a project is conceived and implemented. The state building code does require that buildings in the flood zone are built above the flood zone level, which is in this area 12, I believe. I guess I'll also just note that that the regional policy plan, which may or may not apply to any development potential that occurs on this site, requires actually to consider sea level rise and to elevate buildings an additional foot above base flood elevation. That's something that you may or may not wish to consider. And also at the time that we did this study, we were aware that the Falmouth Conservation Commission was considering flood regulations. I don't know whether they may have adopted something in the intervening time that you need to consider as well. So again, here's the site. We looked at issues and opportunities on this site. It is industrially zoned or light industrially zoned, but housing is not limited by that zoning. Zoning currently allows up to 66 multifamily units on the property. The site is in proximity to many community facilities, which I'm sure you're well aware of. It's also proximate to open space, including immediately adjacent, thanks to your CPA funds, and Little Pond right there. And again, the limits really have to do with the flood zone mapping on this site. Considerations for addressing buildings on this property would include either elevating the livable floor space above that flood elevation. That could impact handicap accessibility, or elevating the site, bringing fill in and building the buildings on top of the fill. If you introduce fill to the site, you have to have an engineer look at the considerations for how that may displace floodwaters onto neighboring properties if possible. I think the potential for that is relatively slim given the volumes of fill that we've looked at here, and the overall size of the property, but at the same time, it's a very important consideration that any potential developer will need to look at carefully. So here are 4 potential scenarios that we analyzed and provided recommendations on in the report in more detail. And I suggest that they're not the only 4 configurations, certainly, but these 6 buildings on each of these 4 scenarios would accommodate the 30 units that was the scope for this study. And you'll see in scenario 1, and is this the pointer? Okay. That the buildings are sited along Spring Bars Road, the idea being that's sort of consistent with the residential character in the neighboring parts of town, and that the fill required to accommodate, and this is estimates, even though there's a 1 cubic yards there, and these are really estimates, but would be the greatest of these 4 scenarios at 9,500 cubic yards. The second scenario places the development more in what we've referred to as the boot area of the site, and would take advantage of being nestled into the conservation area. It could be a very nice amenity, access to Little Pond. That has a much lower fill requirement at 3,675 cubic yards. Scenario 3, down here, clusters the buildings on the northwest part of the site, closer to Worcester Court and other development in that part of town. This also has a fairly high fill requirement at 7,696 cubic yards. And then the final scenario clusters the buildings, I guess they range between 5 and 6 buildings, I'm just realizing that now. Clusters the development in 5 buildings. Right across from, there's a wetland across the street on Spring Bars Road that would provide sort of a natural buffer to those buildings. And this is the lowest cubic yard requirement. So I think, as I've made clear at this point, any scenario you look at is going to require some fill. In putting out an RFP for this proposal, you're going to want to make clear that any bidder consider those implications very carefully. One of the other things that we suggested in our report that the town consider is the opportunity for transferring some of the development rights on this property either to another parcel within town, or making them either part of what the developer would use going forward, or something that the town retains for development potential in the future. It does require some modifications to your TDR bylaw, as I understand it, but the scenario that we looked at only proposed 30 units. There's an additional 30 units that could be accommodated on this site, and you should take advantage of that development potential in some fashion. So then, just briefly, I wanted to just give you an overview of the main recommendations that came out of the overall study. We recommended that the town look at creating a transition area along Worcester Court, making it more pedestrian friendly, changing some of the uses there to distinguish this area from 28 along here. Make zoning changes to change the form of buildings and their relationship on the site, closer setbacks to the road, make it more pedestrian friendly, slow down traffic through this area. Other recommendations included master plans for the 3 main plazas in the study area, again thinking about ways to make them more pedestrian friendly. And overall, think about the pedestrian network to really strengthen connections within the community to so many of your great community facilities in this area, beach, harbor, community center, et cetera. Think about potential transfer of development rights. Look at a green corridor here, which is actually the topic of another scope of work with the Commission at the present time. And then there were a number of transportation safety improvements. So that's all I have for you. I'm happy to try to field any questions you might have.
Any questions? I do think it would make sense for us to at least review a little bit about where the history of this whole site, which isn't as much of the Cape Cod Commission. I want to fill in the details as best I remember, and maybe I think we have some other people, maybe Barb Schneider could tell us more. But this was a parcel that was purchased about 4 years ago with $2 million that was from the CPC for affordable housing. And I think another $1 million that was for open space on this parcel also. And it was dedicated specifically for those two, those monies came from the funding sources that was designated as that. And it has been sitting on the back burner for a while. And I certainly felt it was important to answer the question of town meeting, who funded this with $2 million for affordable housing, that we move forward and do something, or at least make some decisions.
Well, I was going to say that that's very true. We considered this some time back. But two things have happened recently that I think changes the whole dynamic for the use of the parcel. And the first is that we now have the floodplain maps. So we now really know for sure where those floodplains are and what we can do. And secondly, we did not have the permit from DEP for the sewer at that time. And that was a huge issue because we were going to have to consider septic systems or something like that, and that was in an area that certainly wasn't conducive to septic systems. So I think those two major factors of the floodplain maps and also having that permit from DEP now to do the sewer, and with the possibility of being able to connect it to the sewer system because the sewer line would go right by it, would certainly enhance the desirability maybe of actually developing the parcel in some way. So I think those two things are really important. The other thing that I don't know if the rest of you feel the way I do, but this whole concept of transfer of development rights is something that we don't really know a whole lot about. Like, do you have to transfer the actual number? Does it have to be the same square footage that you're transferring, or what? But I think that we should really get some appropriate advice on that so we know for sure what that option is and that we can weigh it, I think, in relation to some of the other issues that we have. But we have two major positive factors that have occurred that really enhance, if you will, the possibility of being able to develop that parcel that we didn't have before.
Sure, and I just maybe check this with the town manager, but I think there might be a third, because with the sewer development, construction, and project, I think some of the digging is going to allow some fill to be placed in this area. So in terms of development, it might not be as daunting as originally thought.
That's correct. The board may recall, as Selectman Moran's pointed out, that conditional on the permit you extended to Robert Auer for material storage was the understanding that at the conclusion of that storage, some fill material, some clean and approvable fill material would be placed at a location to be determined by the town in anticipation of this opportunity. So that would also be an additional dynamic, correct?
Any comments from the board? Heather?
Just one additional comment. The affordable housing, Cape Cod Commission's affordable housing specialist, Paul Rachinskas, put a lot of time into really analyzing the potential for development on this site, and did find that there was potential. It seemed like a reasonable thing to move forward with. There's a great section in the report that itemizes feasibility and RFP considerations. So I just encourage you to go back to that as you think about how you craft an RFP potentially if you seek to move forward that way. Because I think it really addresses in detail a number of the things beyond this flood zone issue that you would want a bidder to consider.
But those feasibilities were considering that the septic system was going to be done by the developer.
No, actually, the
It's not?
report, I'm pretty sure, he did it both ways,
Okay.
but he knew that there was a strong likelihood that sewering would happen in this area and be
Right.
available, and I think that's how the report was structured.
Okay. Tim?
Can I ask a question, Heather, while she's there? You kind of indicated that relative to this whole flood storage area, that a fill required to put 30 units in here would be pretty small and would not cause a lot of change in flood surge currents and such. Are you comfortable with that? I mean,
Well, that's an offhand comment from me in to some respect. I'm not an engineer, but just thinking about, so I strongly recommend that, an engineer needs to look at that. But in terms of the overall volume of fill that we're looking at, between 9,500 and, on the high end and 3,000 on the low end, and given the overall area that we're looking at here, and that it's a depression, I think there is capacity within there to accommodate that loss. One of the recommendations in the report is that there are some existing remaining mounds of soil from the prior excavation activities on this site. They could be moved, essentially, use that fill to raise up your development location, and then you're balanced out in that way. Introducing new fill from off-site is something you're going to need to evaluate whether you're going to have flooding impacts on neighboring properties.
So would the board like to?
Next steps?
Well, there was an RFP that had been put forward with a lot of work from the CPC. It was done about 2 years ago. I personally feel it needs some revision before we would actually put it out there. And I think it needs to take a good look at it, and also because of some of the issues that have changed. But I would encourage us to see if we could move forward on revising it and getting a professional to look at it again and be prepared to make a vote to, if we're comfortable with it, to get it out there and see what developers say about it. I mean, if the developers come back and say no one's interested in it, I think that's a very important piece of information for us to have, and go back to the town and say, well, this option was not available. The 30 units, we're not restricted to 30 units. It could be down to 20 units. We could look at doing some different things. We might have to look into whether we're going to completely move away from lease and have it be purchased. But right now, I would like to see us proceed and how we can investigate whether this actually can work or not.
Okay.
Tim?
well, I actually share that same view myself, but I know I've been reaching out to members of the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission, and I know they're here. I think
And how-
perhaps we need to at least allow somebody, a representative of those groups, to come up to summarize where they think their members are, or at least the issues that their members might be raising with respect to developing this particular project.
But certainly if their boards have discussed it, they can represent what their boards have said. Or they're certainly welcome to, I think, to have some public comment on what they feel personally, I think is fine also.
Right.
So are there people in the public who would like to express a view on it? Barb? I guess Jim.
I'm Jim Fox. I'm chairman of the planning board, and with me is Bob Leary. You're here. There are some other things that have changed. We had Hurricane Sandy came in, and that was one of the things that really changed my view of it. And the time that I've spent working on the local comprehensive plan, we really learned a lot. I've lived on the water my whole life, and I really never was a believer in the sea level rise. I haven't seen the change in my 60 years, but places I walked on Wall Street went underwater, and when Hurricane Sandy comes in, so you can't doubt that that's a possibility happening. Falmouth recently passed the coastal resiliency, or put together our goals for the local comprehensive plan, which Bob and I and others worked on for about 2 years. And we studied all the history that we could learn from Sandy, the things going on there, and we crafted what we thought was a much longer view than just, well, how are you going to solve this housing problem right now? You know, we were looking, okay, what are we going to have to do to keep our town be able to survive for the next 50 or 100 years in storms? And what really came to it is we have to have some kind of shock absorber for this storms. And what really became clear that our wetlands areas and our flood zones are those shock absorbers. And if you're really taking a long view, it doesn't make sense. I mean, we're going to be faced with the things we wrestled on the local comprehensive plan is how we're going to preserve our bridges, our roads, the bike path, the sewer line, all the things that get exposed to the water, and all the town things that we have to maintain, possibly relocate at great expense, and move and protect. And I think the town should take a leadership role and really not do any more development in the floodplain. If you really think that we're going to have sea level rise, and it could be even the commission saying that they want to add another foot or maybe 2 feet to the buffering, building in the floodplain doesn't make sense, especially for the town. We think the town should take a leadership role and follow the coastal resiliency plan we put together and voted on and approved in November of 2014. And in that plan, one of the action items was to identify areas that could be used for buffering the storm and floodplain areas like this. And it's a perfect location for that. I mean, it is part of the floodplain right now. To fill the floodplain, I think could be questionable. I think you have to actually excavate out and take the soil out to equal what you build up, and so you end up with a series of moats and hills. And what we really took out of this plan, I know it's difficult, but the transfer of development rights could be a real opportunity. One of the things we've talked about on the local comprehensive plan, we'll be bringing it on other issues, is in redevelopment of some areas, if the town were to develop a bank of development, that we could go to a developer or a property owner in this area that's high and dry, but right in the same areas that has the connections to the sewer, the public transportation, and go to them and say, we have 60 units that we could add to your site if they redeveloped it. And we started taking some of these pedestrian pathways and connections and everything that this plan talked about that we could accomplish in the longer view. And so that's really the concerns we have. When we met in this room, when the Cape Cod Commission submitted their plan, our board was really concerned about the development in the floodplain, and we still have all those same concerns. So that hasn't changed. Bob has a couple things he would like to say, but there's a lot more study that needs to go. I mean, we would like to see from the local comprehensive plan point of view that we go after these development rights, that we put together. We would have to change some of the zoning in order to apply them to other places. That's something, but that's on our housing study. If you look at the things that we're going to be bringing to you very shortly on housing, it's going to be possibly identifying a multifamily district or an overlay district where we can put greater density, but it'll have to be near the sewer, near public transportation, has to be along the 28 corridor, and we like to have connections to downtown and the beaches. So a lot of this land, not necessarily the floodplain, but the highland immediately adjacent to it, that's also part of the study, would be perfect for where we should grow. So it's a very complicated issue. We're going to be faced with a lot of difficult decisions in this town in dealing with sea level rise and coastal resiliency. And I think the town should be a leader and not even just because we can do it. I mean, the study says there's a way to do it. You can spend enough money, get enough tax tax credits, and you can definitely build on this site, it's feasible. But I don't think we should build it on it. I think this should be one of the, we've identified these type of areas to be buffers for future sea level rise, and it'd be perfect for it, so. Bob has a couple of points. Thank you.
Evening, Bob Leary, Planning Board. First of all, I don't think we should let a development dictate what we do with town land. I think as a town, we should be the ones that do the dictating. And if you look at this area, you look at Little Pond, it forms a funnel. That was what happened with Sandy. You had all these funnels where the tidal surges went right up. They had sand in manholes a mile inland. Back in the Hurricane 38, we talked about studying Sandy. I've studied Hurricane 38, I've studied Katrina, studied Bob. We have done a lot of legwork on coastal resiliency and sea level rise and all the science involved. I mean, I think we're probably the most schooled out of any committee in town on this issue. And back in the Hurricane of 38, the Falmouth fishing fleet was up at the Half and Kettle. So to think that it couldn't happen, it can happen, and it has happened. But I also felt that the Cape Cod Commission's report was kind of tepid at best when it came to recommending a development on this site. And I've gone through page by page, and page 5, there are like 6 or 7 items that they highlighted as some of them, they recommend a greater buffer to the vernal pools. There's vernal pools on this site. The whole cut and fill aspect of it, where you do one, oh geez, you're going to be in the vernal pool here, and they're recommending a greater distance from the vernal pools. They state that the floodplain designation is the most significant natural resource issue on this site. And the recently modified firm maps indicate an even greater area of the parcel within the flood area than originally. Page 8, there's other things on that. Page 15, there's page 16, page 17. The most significant there on page 17 is the introduction of fill within a floodplain is regulated under the Wetlands Protection Act. The proponent would have to demonstrate that the fill will not cause an increase or will contribute incrementally to an increase in the horizontal extent and level of floodwaters during peak flows, or in the alternative, create a compensatory storage area in the property. So again, you got all these constraints within this area that you're trying to work in. And I don't really, the Cape Cod Commission, I think, it illustrates this, that it's not going to be that easy. Again, it's feasible, but you can put this out on Horseshoe Shoals if you want. That's feasible. Any development on this site may also be subject to additional floodplain regulations. Page 18, as redevelopment projects occur along this corridor, the town should consider opportunities to restore this wetland system, especially where the wetland system intersects with the floodplain. Page 29, there currently exist safety, congestion, and connectivity issues in the area surrounding the proposed project site. These issues could be made worse. Page 55, if natural resource buffers and flood zone constraints are taken into account, there is a limited amount of developable area on the project site. Page 57, the uncertain boundary of the flood zone is likely the greatest concern. The Buzzards Bay Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan of 2012 update, in their goals, public health and safety from problems associated with coastal hazards, including sea level rise, shifting shorelines, and damage from storms and storm surge. Goal 18.1 is to protect public health. Goal 18.2, reduce the public financial burden caused by the destruction of or damage to coastal property. So if we put something there, who's responsible, who's culpable for that? Goal 18.3, plan for shifting shorelines and inland mitigation or migration of buffering wetlands and shifting sand formations and the species that utilize these habitats. Public spending for infrastructure in high-risk areas should be avoided, and government should not create incentives for private construction in high-risk zones. The Chatham recently passed a conservancy district bylaw that prohibits development in the 100-year floodplain. And some of the tenets of this bylaw, which has been upheld, upheld by the Massachusetts Supreme Court, some of the prohibited uses in this district are filling of land, draining of land, construction of residential units, building of any structure in a V and V1 through 30 zones, actions that destroy natural vegetation, alter existing tidal flow, or otherwise alter the character of the land. As a planning board, we are looking to not create problems that are going to come forward in the future. We are planners. We look long-term. This housing issue for this site is a short-term look at something. We do have, as Jim mentioned, other things that are coming down the pike that are going to address housing. This is I'm so pleased that the town purchased this land because not only for flood mitigation purposes, but nitrogen mitigation, it could be a great laboratory for any school or organization that wants to study wetland restoration. I think it could be used as a recreation area, which is one of the tenets of the CPC. I just think putting a housing development on the site is not the right thing when we're looking at the long-term view of what we're trying to do with coastal management, sea level rise, and coastal resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you. Barb? Barb.
Oh.
Barbara Schneider. I came tonight because I wanted to sit and listen and hear what the selectmen had to say about this. I will remind you all that I was on the CPC and stood before the town, and people were jumping for joy when we came up with $3 million to stop a 160-unit development from going in and found a way to make a deal to have this property. Nobody came forward with a million points like this at the time. We had very specific needs for the $2 million of affordable housing space. That land was not beautiful open space. It would never have been recommended as a $3 million open space parcel, believe me. People are muttering under their breath here, you know, that it was a dump, all these, I'm hearing comments. All we had there was, we had an area that abutted the pond, that went into a white cedar swamp. We had a few areas, a vernal pool we wanted to save, but we did not have $3 million of open space. We worked for so long, and the CPC that's continuing today has worked for so long, carefully going through every step, coming up with good options for building. You saw 4 potential areas that still left the bulk of the land open. It is not okay to say it's a $3 million buffer for flood zone for a once-in-a-100-year. I mean, unless you want to honestly stop everything from being built everywhere else, I feel like you're picking on this. And if you do want to use it for that, then the town has to come up with $2 million to put back in the CPC coffers toward affordable housing. That's the law. And I will tell you that in talking with the CPC, the commission for the state, they are not at all comfortable with the idea of trading, and having people in a town meeting and in town voting to have one amount of money spent on something only to have it traded for something else. They don't even know if that's legal. They haven't looked into it. They've never had anyone else in the state do it. So I'm just bringing up that it's not as simple as simply standing here and saying, we don't want to build there. There are ramifications to not building there. And it certainly seems like at this point, with a few tweakings that are actually in a positive way, putting this out and seeing if a developer can develop on one part of that land makes sense. But please don't think this is just going to go away And that $3 million that was spent, if we had $2 million wasted anywhere else in this town, people would be screaming all over the place about it. And I find it interesting that we sit with that kind of expenditure and think it was okay to do nothing with it. And that's all I'm going to say.
Anyone else?
Yes. Good
Mr. Finneran?
Mark Finneran, Precinct 6. I can dispute a few of those statements. The spending of the $3 million on the property, I mean, in the end, I'm glad they bought it as well. But the proposed developer had paid like a $12,000 retainer to Moose Pacheco. Had he gotten the okay to build that land, he would have had to go and get a loan from the bank. A bank would have required a 21E on that property, and it never would have passed. It was never required to have a 21E because we paid cash for it. Now, I don't know if, and you may know, if they went forward with either the elevated foundations or changing the topography of the property there, whether it would have to be, borings would have to be done or whatever. But I have personal experience with that property. There was a business that was run out there, and they stored a lot of boats, and I was out dropping some stuff off at the business, and I picked up a kid, and I ran over a hose that was running out to a trailer, right on the coupling. And we were gone for about 5 hours. I brought the kid back. He was actually living in a trailer in high school, living on his own, so I used to employ him. I went back. There was a sinkhole there about 20 feet across, 10 feet deep, and there was nothing in there but garbage and barrels and stuff, because everybody who knows the history of that place knows that Melvin was dumping his garbage at night and Moose was covering up in the daytime. That piece of property was a wetland, and it should go back to being a wetland. And as far as building houses, public housing, self-insure in a velocity zone, that's really not a good concept. Thanks.
Anyone else? Thank you. Sam?
I just would like to straighten out something. I think Heather alluded to this. This is not in the velocity zone. And a lot of the points that Bob was making basically assumed that it is in the velocity zone. Oh, you mentioned some things that it, but I just want to clarify that. I've tried to look at this from all sides. The need is very obvious. We need more affordable housing for retired people on fixed incomes who are almost being pushed out of their houses by the demand given by retirees who are coming in here with lots of money that want to buy those houses and turn them into even fancier houses. We need young workers, the demographics of the entire world, but especially Cape Cod, have become more of a column and not a pyramid, where more people are older than there are younger, and more people who are older need more services. And where are the people going to come from who are going to provide us with those basic services? We need housing that's reasonable. Most of them can't afford down payments on the homes that are here in the town. We have a workforce issue, and this was highlighted very graphically by a summit that was held in cooperation with the Cape Cod Realtors Association and Home Builders and Renovators Association. And we had testimony from everyone from the CEO of Cape Cod Healthcare to the owner of Shepley Building Products, people across Cape Cod basically saying, we're going to have to bus employees to Cape Cod in order to be able to provide the services that people expect from our businesses. It's become a critical situation in that regard. And then we have just the normal, human charitable capacity to look after people with disabilities who typically don't have high-income jobs. The need for community housing is great. We aren't anywhere close to the state's goal of 10% affordability in this town. This is an opportunity. It was obviously seen to be an opportunity many years ago. The investment was made to set it aside. we're not developing that entire parcel with this proposal. We're talking about 30 units in a limited portion with some fill required to actually get it above that flood zone, not subject to the velocity zone. As you can see from that diagram right there, yes, there is a funnel effect. And that is what's going to preserve that area from being in a velocity zone. And the amount of fill that's going to be used, if you just look at the range of that flood basin, which, by the way, even extends from what I have seen in flood zone maps, even across Cape Cod Mall and out even into the low areas of Route 28 for those 100-year storms. So, yes, maybe the first floor of these units will flood. Maybe there'll be some property damage. Building's not going to go away. The building's still going to be there. I have lived in different parts of this country, and when I look at the risk that Californians put up with in the earthquake, which are totally unpredictable, at least coastal storms, we know typically a couple of days ahead of time when they're coming. We can evacuate people. We can preserve, the well-being of humans. Yes, there might be some property damage, but to me, there has to be a risk-benefit trade-off here. And we're dealing with realms of probabilities. And I think in this case, we can ask for developers to propose prudent measures that will minimize the risk to health and property, if you will, and take a look and see what the heck they come up with. And then look at it from that perspective. So I am not scared by the threats that were, but their reality. I believe in sea level rise, in climate change, but I also believe that these are events that occur in short periods of time. And if you look at what happens after earthquakes on the West Coast, their economies are thriving, they go back in, they rebuild, and they start over again because they know that the next event could be 20, 30 years, who knows, right? It's probabilities. We're human beings, we're adaptable, and we can recover from storm surges. This is an opportunity to serve a need that's here and now, and one that's not going to go away. This won't be the last development this town needs. We've got to have all those other parcels and opportunities which are in the hands of private people right now, and I'm not sure how we're ever going to turn them into affordable housing opportunities. Nobody's convinced me that there's anybody that actually is taking that challenge seriously and going out there to change what's necessary to turn private property into affordable housing. We see these sporadic 40Bs pop up. 8 units here, 12 units there. It's really slow. And I'm not sure how we're going to be able to do it. So I'm personally not deterred by the threats of storm. I think we need to mitigate against those, but they're a reality. We're going to live with it as human beings, and we are by far and away not in the most risky situation here in Cape Cod in this particular area. There are other places that are far greater risk, and I think we need to take a look at the risk versus benefit and what our alternatives are, right? So I'm in favor of moving ahead in spite of all of the concerns of other people. And I'm not I'm not a denier of risk.
So with the, yep, Holly?
Hi, Holly Wilson. I'm Chair of the Affordable Housing Committee, and I'm newly appointed to the CPC as a member of the Falmouth Housing Authority. We had a housing demand study published last September that was funded by the CPA funds. And there was a recommendation there to form a working group to talk about affordable housing and the needs for affordable housing in this town. I would like to see the Board of Selectmen call to have that group put together. There's a lot of questions to be answered on just the Spring Bars Road potential. Very compelling arguments on both sides this evening. And I think that more discussion is needed in order to figure out what the needs are in the longer term, as was stated by Bob Leary for the Planning Board. we need to look at our long-term needs, and we need to consider climate change, sea level rise, and all of those things in the mix with that. Don't think it's something that the Board of Selectmen necessarily have time to do with the heavy agendas that you carry. Here we are, 10:15 at night, and this is not the first time that the Board of Selectmen has tried to address this sort of thing. In the past year, I've been watching very carefully. And I think that if we were to bring people together, including people from the different committees that already exist in this town, as well as developers, people who actually benefit from affordable housing, people who need affordable housing, et cetera, et cetera. The Affordable Housing Committee put a list of those sorts of people together 3 years ago, and we've not yet been able to share that as a potential way of going forward with planning for affordable housing in this town. So that's what I'd like to see.
It's actually one item that I hope to have on our joint meeting with the planning board to create that task force. And so I think our meeting we're hoping to have on September 9th. That will be an item on the agenda. And so they're hoping at that point to get some suggestions as to what the makeup of that committee would be. But I think the idea was that's a much bigger picture that we need to move forward. Is this one small picture we want to proceed with at least? Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with a lot of the points that Sam made. I think, when you look at this parcel of land, we did buy it. The town did buy it for a specific purpose. We know more now than we knew before. I mean, we do have the floodplain maps now. That gives us good information. It gives a developer good information. And then we also know that the sewer is going to bypass it, so that's going to even increase the value of the property as well. I think we should just put out an RFP and to anyone, any developer who is interested. Here's the property. You can only use, obviously, a certain portion of it. And here it is. This is what it as is, and just see what we get back.
I just want to echo that, because what it brings is it's sort of a two-prong approach. I mean, the town has a responsibility and already agenda items to move affordable housing efforts, but it doesn't mean at the same time we can't use all of the private resources that are available when, as you suggested at the beginning, when an RFP goes out, and people who, have their own money in a potential project are very careful about, how they're going to spend it, whether it makes sense, what the insurability is, what the upside is, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. The town boards, the planning, all of the related boards will have oversight and communication. So I like the idea as a two-prong approach. I think we should move ahead with it.
So the CPC did create an RFP for this project. I'm not sure if that's the one we want to go through, or whether we want to, how would the board like to proceed, with that one or some revision to it? Rebecca?
I think your suggestion of the two boards that are going to be meeting on the 9th, we should have a deadline of some type. We should say that if we had the meetings between planning and the selectmen, and to come up with a schedule, because it's been years that we continue to talk about where is going to be the location for affordable housing. And that piece of property has been up and down as far as, are you going to build or you're not going to?
Well, I guess I'm really seeing there's two things. The meeting on the 9th is
Yes.
the bigger picture, creating the task force. And I'm asking, actually, does our board want to move forward with the Spring Rise Road project separate from that?
I have a question in that. Can the vote be for the town manager to review the present RFP and make appropriate updates?
Present?
Well, I think it certainly could be. One of the things that Heather and I have discussed is the feasibility of bringing in an outside consultant to work with us in that overview, and that is what we would advocate were the board to feel that you wanted to move ahead in an RFP process, bring in a third party to build upon the work that's been done and craft an RFP on behalf of the board.
I believe even there could be administrative costs covered by the CPA for that kind of project, because it already is a project that was funded through CPC funders.
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
Subject to the proper approvals.
Heather's.
Heather may
Just
have
a couple of
comment,
comments. In terms of the consultant facilitation, one of the things that role would be, one, take a look at the last RFP, take out some of the bells and whistles that are in there, put in some of the things that we've talked about this evening to make sure that it's reflective of modern interests, 2015 interests. But moreover, to oversee that process, to review the development proposals when they come in, to ensure that they meet all the standards that are listed in the RFP, to review the pro forma and any of the financing mechanisms to make sure that the town gets what it's asking for at the end, that there really is a rigorous view of the development proposal by someone who's accustomed to looking at those. We don't have that tech expertise in-house, and we recommend bringing someone in to help us do that, so it would be two
All right,
pieces.
that's good.
If you don't mind, I'd like to just make a quick comment about the slide that's up here, and I really appreciate that Heather and the commission ended their presentation on this particular slide. Over the years, some of the concerns I've had about this property is that the property is zoned industrial. That essentially was taken away when it was purchased with CPC funds, that it is now has a residential and recreation open space component. But the remainder of the area is commercial C, which is the highest level of commercial use you can use. And that whole area has grown and developed in a way that it's responded to its intense use. We're introducing a much lower intensity use with housing. And so the issues related to master planning, redevelopment, looking at ways to reuse the adjacent area in a way that's consistent with the planned use of residential accommodation. That's going to require work with the planning board. And I was lucky enough to sit with Sam and two members of the planning board the other day and raise that issue, that if the Board of Selectmen is inclined to move forward with the affordable housing use, we're going to have to continue to work together if we want to make sure that we really are building a resilient community and we aren't just putting housing in a property that was formerly many different high-level industrial operations. So those are my interests moving forward. I will commit to working on those and hope that the two boards continue to discuss those well into the future.
I certainly am torn by this because either I'm ignoring the planning board or I'm ignoring town meeting. And I guess I'm more inclined to say, I'm sorry, planning board, town meeting voted for this purpose, and I feel obligated to proceed to that. And not in disrespect to what the planning board or, I'm not sure whether they've discussed it recently or whether it's just Jim and Bob I'm saying that to, but I think that's where I'm feeling a little stronger pushing my back to say, let's see what RFP, after it gets revised, see if there are some responses to it, because that was our charge, I think, from town meeting.
Yeah, if I might, and I think every project in every location has its challenges, and I think the way to proceed is to move them forward as responsibly as we can and vet whether they're going to be viable or not, and I think this would be the first step. And I think Heather made a very, very important point. You know, and the consultant can, I'm sure, put some things in the RFP that would help the desires of the planning board if that's the case at the time.
It does make it a little bit harder if a private developer comes forward wanting to do a project in an area that we think, oh, but that would be such a good buffer area. And for us to tell them, saying, nope, we're going to use that for flood mitigation for us, but we used the same kind of property for our own development. So I understand that message could be conflicting. So can we move, Sam?
Well, I guess the question becomes if we, retain a consultant to do the tailoring of this RFP, where's the money going to come from, right? And who's
That's his
his
problem.
problem? Just pass it along.
Well, one thing we said we could look into is whether that still can be covered within the administrative fees from the administrative budget of the CPC.
I don't know. Did Virginia have to leave? Oh, there you are, Virginia. You moved up. I don't know whether you feel like the administrative budget might include working on revising that RFP or not. Could you address that?
Virginia Carmichael, Vice Chair of the CPC. Our current appropriated administrative budget does not include enough money to cover the full cost of revising or rewriting the RFP. In answer to that's the short answer to your question. It's possible, there's no precedent for this, but it's worth considering whether the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund would cover the cost of that. And also, I just wanted to say that a 21E has been performed on the property and found that no further environmental studies needed to be done. So anything else I could answer?
No, that's very helpful.
That's great. All right,
So I propose a motion to ask the town manager to look into hiring a consultant and finding the funds for it, and coming back to us if we need some approval to both revise the RFP and then ultimately to be able to analyze what's going to come towards us.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
I'll second that.
oh, he's not making the motion. He's just suggesting that's
I'll
what the
suggest that
motion
motion.
is. So you move it. I'll move it and you can second it. How's that?
Please do.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
No.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None?
Good job, boy.
Okay.
Thanks, Heather.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather, and Cape Cod Commission.
Don't forget your stick.
I think she wants to go home.
The next big topic is the senior center site feasibility and what our next steps are. Our assignment is to choose whether we want to, for phase 2, come up with 2 or 3 sites, and asking the consultant to give us a more specific and accurate accounting of the feasibility of these 2 or 3 sites.
Might as well start.
Now, let's go.
Well, I've been giving this a lot of thought too, and I think that attending the presentations, from the architect and all of the meetings, I don't think I've missed too many. I just think that there are 3 sites that I think have some merit that we should explore. The high school property, the school administration building, and Gus Canny. I think that all 3 of those have potential, and I don't think we should leave out any one of them. And I would propose that we include those 3 parcels in the review.
Okay.
In the phase
In the-
2.
Well, for consideration, for review. Heather?
Well, I'm
How do
sorry,
I wanna
wanna
say
interrupt
this?
the conversation, but just to clarify, what you've just done is the initial site feasibility. The next step is called the conceptual planning phase, and there'll be a deeper dive with more information, including a more diagrammatic site plan, operational costs,
Right.
estimates,
Okay.
and a traffic study,
And the scope of work we had was really for 2,
too.
but
Was for 2?
it was for 2. We were supposed to get this down to 2 sites.
Oh, I can't
Where
live
the
with
3
2
could
sites.
be is if we had one location in 2 different 2 different spots on that location, we might be able to squeeze.
Like
to
the
meet.
high school, because that has a couple.
Well, you see, when you look at the sites, the high school is just bare ground. So that's, you can move almost anywhere in a range of space on Gifford Street. And I think that's good. So, and I really think that we should consider that. But also because of the relationships that were discussed at some of the meetings between students and having the senior center close by to young people. I think there's some merit to that, and that should be explored. I also think that the school administration building, that is what, a 14,000 square foot building, obviously not large enough, but there is a considerable amount of land behind it. Not, although some of it is a ball field, nevertheless, ball fields we can exchange. That's not a restraint, I don't think, by having them, or a constraint, I guess is the term the architects use. There's a reason not to consider the school administration building. And it's possible that you could even the school administration might want to even stay there, and there would still be room for a senior center if there were space added onto it. And I think there's a lot of good reasons to keep that space in consideration. I know in the summertime, the traffic coming from East Falmouth into town is miserable. And so it might be more difficult, but we have to look at transportation anyway. And what are the ways, the transportation should be part of the whole project. How are people going to get to that site? And I think Gus Canny offers some similar relationships that the high school site does in building in connection with with Gus Canny. And the reason I say that is because we look at our retiree population today, and then we say, in the future, it could be that many more. We could have that many more seniors that we're going to have to consider and provide for. But we don't really know that for sure. But we may also have a lot more children that we may have to provide for. And it seems to me that co-locating them makes a lot of sense. Because if you needed to, if you had less of one group, you have more space. So whether it's on the senior side or on the youth side, you have the option of using the space. So if it were designed in such a way that both groups could share, in a sense, some spaces. I mean, there could be some creative ways to really look at that, because you're really trying to meet the needs of the young and the elderly at the same time. So I think that we should not limit ourselves to just 2 sites, that we should really consider all 3. That's the way I look at it.
I think tonight's the night we need to do it down to 2.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's our charge.
It
That's
is.
what our scope is, and,
Yep.
It is our job to make that decision, and it's not going to be an easy one, but I really think that that's what the consultant wants.
So you want to get it down to 2?
It is. It is our job tonight to get it down to 2.
Why does it have to be 2?
I think that's what they're asking us.
I think I can give you a
But
reason.
it's
I mean,
really our decision.
both the school administration building and the high school site, we have to work with the school committee. And the school committee is basically saying they're not ready to give up the school administration building because they have all of these common services, psychiatric, social services, not to mention administrative services that have to have a home. And there are MSBA regulations that restrict whether you could put it into the high school, because that's not what those funds were allocated for. And so they're telling us they would prefer that we not use the school administration building for the senior center. So that whittles it down to the Gus Canny Center and the high school.
But they have 29 people and 14,000 square feet.
There's still
39 people.
29.
Oh, I thought it was 29.
There's 29. But
That's
there is an
that's a
option
lot of
at the-
space.
At the administration building, there is an option of adding an addition to it.
Yes.
Consolidating the space that's being used. It is not efficient use of that the square feet there for 29 people. We wouldn't have to have them all move. We wouldn't have to have any of them move. We could just move them onto one floor or part of it and make a big enough addition. I think it's still an option. It's not necessarily one I'm pursuing, but I think that we would not have to kick them out, or I think we could honor their requests at the same time as we're fulfilling the needs of the senior center.
In terms of the 2 sites, I think one thing you have to remember
2 now.
is that there are 3 or 4, I think there were, well, there are now, practically speaking, 3 sites just at the high school.
That's right.
And I think that the overriding thing to consider here is that this has been terrifically worked up. From the initial surveys that the senior center put out, up to a conceptual study in terms of what people who use the center, what do they see in terms of needs, where's the population going, what should a new senior center be? And then we had the committee of experts who did many, many public hearings and got more input, and we had FCTV there, and we've had it before our board several times. And we've also appointed a committee to do all of the digging and the nuts and bolts and listen and research all of the specifics. And the chair of the committee I know is here, and I'd like him to highlight the letter that he wrote to the board. So in that respect, I think in whittling it down to 2 sites, which was our plan, I also think we have to listen to the vehement, repeated concerns of the community about the administration building, whether it was a concern about the use of the building, whether the senior center would even be an appropriate use considering its history and its importance in town. Great concerns about traffic in terms of turning, great concerns about traffic and congestion. I mean, this is something people want to frequent, and we want it to be inviting. So the idea of it being a headache to get there and to get out, I think can be very off-putting, and you don't want to put a lot of money into something that people really don't want to use. In terms of Gus Canty, I think that what I heard from the community is that there's great reticence about the traffic there as well, although, there are two exits, but then we have to do really what's a parking garage on 2 levels, and there is a flood zone, so that seems to have a lot of difficulty. And I think the other thing I repeatedly heard was the intergenerational potential really being something that people are excited about in terms of, that opportunities to work with the schools, opportunities for the schools to have the senior center there. So, and just on the high school, there are 3 choices. So I would advocate, having listened to the community, to picking 2 of the sites at the high school. And I also would like the chair to speak at some point.
The reason why I'd like us to, I hope we don't do that, is the sites at the high school are going to be very comparable. And I would like to see how they compare to some renovation. Because if it turns out that the renovation of the administration building or Gus Canty using that site is a half or third of the price of a new building, I'd want to know that. And if we just use the high school site, we don't really have something to compare it to. It's just saying, well, we've made the choice without the knowledge as to how much was it going to cost to build it and maintain it and operate it and run it when it's a single building, as opposed to, well, this big study does is if we did it at the administration building, they'd say, and now operating it, you're going to have these savings because you're doing it in conjunction with something else. Or at Gus Canty, you're doing it with conjunction with something else. You might not have to have a sole set of janitors for this building and a whole set for that. You might be able to have some use of scale.
Well, the purpose is site feasibility. It's not really deciding which site is best. We're really looking at feasibility. And Main Street, to me, is so important in terms of, it's where people come. And if we have a lot of traffic now, then we better start working on ways in which we can divert some of that traffic and find other traffic solutions for people who want to come into town and not just have to come down 28. And I realize that's kind of like pie in the sky thinking, and it may not ever happen for 30 years. But we're going to be building a building that we're going to expect to serve the seniors for the next 30 to 40 years. So we can't think about this week or 2 years from now or 10 years from now. We have to really think 30 years from now because we're going to expect it to last at least 30 years. So where do we think people will be 20 years from now or 30 years from now? And how can we make that fit? I know Julian is dying to
just to
jump in.
supplement your comment, that traffic study is now underway, as the board will recall, and in fact, you're going to have a report on that anticipated for your joint meeting with the planning board in September. So we are looking at the Main Street corridor and related areas in terms of traffic enhancements that will move things in the direction that you have just described, Pat. So I just wanted to interject that into the discussion as well. That doesn't mean it instantly happens, but you do have a process in place because the selectmen have so ordained that are going to bring you some of that analysis and potential insight and answers.
And how do they expect
Okay.
people to travel in the next 20 years? Are we all going to be driving cars 20 years from now?
Rebecca.
We do have to come up with 2 this evening. And I think that there are 3 that are very comparable at the high school. and the fourth one you wouldn't consider. I think Gus Canty is too congested. I mean, you can use as much of the Dillingham as coming into Gus Canty. But if you go up to the administration building and you forget that busy intersection, and you bring your traffic in from Sandwich Road, or you bring it over on the other side, you move the road around the back of the administration building. In thinking about hearing from the school committee many, many times that they want to be made whole, that could be a very expensive project because it's going to be a sports field, apparently. If you put it on Gifford, if you move it more toward Brick Kiln or bring it up behind where the parking area is on the high school, you're going to use some part of the school athletic fields. It's going to cost money, and a lot of money, just to replace that and to make that whole. If you want to think of redirecting the traffic at the administration building and not use 28, come in from Sandwich Road, and then you can build on the administration building, and you don't have to make anyone whole because the people that are there can remain and you can build onto it. And that one field that is there is not used very often. It is used, there are young people up there playing ball, but it isn't used as frequently as any field at the high school. So I look at two locations, would be one at the high school, and I would look at the one on Gifford that is closest to the little market, and then I would look at administration and redirect your route of how you're going to come in. And don't make that corner so congested in your mind. Don't use that. Bring it up around from Sandwich Road. So I can see those two working at a less of a cost.
Before we get to actually naming our votes, is there someone in the audience who'd like to, Jim, do you want to add to your letter, or?
Jim Vieira, Chairman of the Council on Aging, and forgive me if I lacked a little tact tonight. This was way past my bedtime. But you know, we have had multiple public sessions, public forums, surveys, assessments, and you know, time and time again, we've heard from the public with a specific location. And I don't know, I guess I just don't understand why we're not listening to what our seniors have been telling us. You know, the whole point of having these public forums is to get the input. And I think that, you know, as a chairman of my council, when we discussed this, our Council of Aging, Council on Aging was unanimous on supporting the high school site. The working group, when we gave you our recommendation, was the high school and the administration building and the Brickholm Road site, which we now know is not feasible. Gus Canty was not included in our recommendation at that time. So, you know, you appoint committees, you ask for public input, you get all of that, and then you go off in a different direction. You know, I'm sorry that that I'm being so blunt, but that's really how I feel at this stage of the process. You know, we've been working on this for over 2 years, and we just kind of just keep going in circles. And I really think that it's time that we listen to the community and what they have to say. And what we've heard over and over again from the seniors, and the one thing I disagree with you, Pat, we're not building a 30-year building, we're building a 50-year building. And when we look at that, I think it's critical that we have room for a future expansion. You know, I think we made a mistake at our fire station by not putting it someplace where we have expansion. If we cram it in to some of the locations that have been suggested, I think that we're doing ourselves a disservice and we're painting ourselves into a box. I think that there are locations at the high school that give us an opportunity for future expansion. They give us an opportunity to add programs. You know, I visited a senior center in Wellfleet, a wonderful senior center, that has a marvelous big garden in the back that the seniors can use. You know, if we don't think about what we're going to be doing in the future, we're not going to have those options. So I would really like to, you asked for my opinion. It's my opinion. I think we should listen to the public. I think we should put the senior center someplace that gives us options for the future. Thank you.
I have a question for Jim. Overwhelmingly, the seniors said the high school. They were afraid of the administration building and didn't like us canting. And the fear had mostly to do with traffic. With respect to the high school sites and ideas like, you know, expansion, potential garden, that kind of thing, which of the high school sites do you think it would be most important to look at?
It's my opinion that if we were going to narrow the sites down to 2 sites, for example, that I'm not sure of the numbers, but I would say the site on Brickhill Road and the site that's north of the tennis courts, that's going out towards Old Campus Drive. And I think that, you know, when the consultant came up with that site that's just north of Jack and the Beanstalk, I thought that was a wonderful suggestion. And I think that it could work there. But I don't think it gives us the room for future expansion, and I don't think it gives us the outdoor space to do some of the programs that the Council on Aging would like to see in the future. And, you know, some of these programs aren't going to happen, you know, the month after we build a building. Some of these programs we're going to grow into over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And, you know, it would be really nice to give the town the opportunity to have those options.
But don't you think the one north of the tennis courts, I mean, you're going to have it's a fairly large distance between the senior center and the high school for seniors to go. You have the entire tennis court and the parking lot to actually get there. I would think that you'd be losing almost all of the reason to be near the high school if you go to that site.
I think we need to keep in mind that we need to look at the core of the senior center, and I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to have the intergenerational programs. But I think it's more important that we concentrate on the programs that we have for seniors. I see the intergenerational opportunities as an added benefit.
Okay.
But I think that the core things that we do, I think would be better off in that site and not in the small site.
Jim, which site were you referring to on Brickhill?
The Brickhill Road site, I think, was identified by Joel as Site 1. It's where they have I think they play lacrosse there. I think it's lacrosse field.
Soccer.
Parking lot.
It's still high school.
Jack and the Beanstalk, there's a parking lot, and then there's the field. Starting from the traffic light, working west.
Going west. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. I know where you are then.
It's the varsity soccer field and lacrosse field.
Yeah, the soccer field. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that was part of was an option.
Yeah, it's one of the 4.
Okay.
Is there anything else? Mr. Finner?
Thank you.
Mark Finneran, Precinct 6. Been kicking this around for 2 years. 2 years ago, when you put out applications for this committee, I was the only one that applied. I didn't get appointed, but I came with a location, which was the old Cape Cod Baptist Church, for $800,000, under $70 a square foot. We could be there by now. You have all the room in the world to expand up above, a lot cheaper than anything you're going to spend now. And then had we done that, the joint dispatch could be in the old senior center, and we maybe wouldn't have spent $500,000 on negotiations with the firemen, but I've always been wrong, so I might as well stay consistent. Thanks a lot.
Useless information.
So, Sue?
I'm going to make a motion that we proceed with the 2 locations on the high school that the chair just described.
I'll second.
For further discussion, I guess I still reiterate, I'd like to have, I am so supportive of the high school site that one thing I'm trying to do is do everything we can to get support for it by having something to compare it to.
Compare it with, yeah.
And if we don't have someplace else to compare it to say, look, these are all the reasons why the high school site's the best place. Because we tried this other site, and the high school site beats it on this count, and it beats it on this count, and just have a little bit more dollar figures. We don't have any dollar figures as to what it's going to cost to do it at either place, but I just think to have all of that information on cost at only one site, I would rather have the sort of the negative of the either administration or Gus Canty saying, yep, that just didn't work. Let's all gung-ho get behind the high school site. That's the reason why I keep wanting to have that other information.
I agree with the principle. I think it makes a lot of sense, except it seems that this process has been going on for so long that the community, the voters, the taxpayers are really intent on the high school site. And so I think that, you know, money is always an issue, but it's oftentimes not the most important issue. And I haven't heard from the community, in other words, that, you know, time is also money. I haven't heard from the community that they want to spend more time on this or that they would, you know, desire another site other than the high school.
I happen to agree with Doug. I think you need an alternative to look at. You can't just say 2 sites on the high school because it's like saying the same thing. You know, this section of the road or that section of the road. I think it would be a lot more informational if we included a second site. We didn't decide what it was. I don't know. Did you say?
I'd be leaning towards
Another
administration
site.
building. But,
Okay.
I would agree with that, too.
Why don't you make an amendment then?
my question, I guess for Heather, back to the scope of services, is whether it could be 2 sites at the high school and the 3rd site. Is that still within the...
We'd have to find out whether it's possible. I think if the board really desired to do that, I'd recommend that you vote the priority high school site, the alternative site, and then the second priority high school site. We can find out what the additional costs are, because I think it depends on which 2 high school sites you select.
Which sites at the high school we're talking about? Which sites are we talking about?
Well, I was thrown for a loop by Jim's recommendation, because I was very leaning towards the softball field site number 1, I think, that was, I guess, a smaller one. And that's what I thought when I was at committees, people were really pushing in that direction, but...
Can I just follow up? The reason I recommend that is the consultant can get to work immediately on those others. And the additional work associated with the second high school site is going to be a degree more.
Yeah, I don't think that's...
He's waiting to hear from us.
don't
And I just want to
think we need to
reassure the board that the time to evaluate the options has been built into your process. There's no expectation that you would not do that. You shouldn't feel like you're adding time on to a process that's already begun. You adopted this process, and we recommend that you see it through.
Would you repeat the motion?
The motion was to look at the 2 sites recommended by, as Jim just stated, by the committee.
Right. Oh, by the committee.
At the high school.
2 high school sites.
Which 2?
Which
Brick
2?
Hill.
This was where the, right,
tennis
Brick
courts.
And the
Hill,
one by Old Campus Drive that
Oh,
currently
okay.
the girls field hockey.
They were called 1 and 3.
1 and 3.
Jim?
Okay.
2 and 3? The Brick Hill Road and the north of the tennis court site. Is what-
Yeah, if it was possible to look at all 3 of those sites, I think the Council on Aging would be delighted to see what the options are for all 3 of those sites. I don't know how that fits in with the budget, but, we would like to do what is best for this community, and as you said, get as much information as we can to make this decision, based on the knowledge that we have this swell of public support for this location. But within that location, we would like to explore as many options as we can. And it's very difficult for us to make a decision until we see what the alternatives are on that site. And I think that Joel brought, the 3 sites that Joel brought all have, valuable resources.
In just, sort of taking off on what Jim just said, by adding a site that the community is not open to, at least from everything I've heard at the public forums, we're missing the opportunity to look at one of the sites they are. There are 3 separate sites at the high school. It would also be, I guess, finding additional money to look at additional site. When you build a building, I mean, look at the high school campus and how big it is. There are 3 different sets of analyses that would have to go into that. You don't really, by looking at one, you can't just Xerox it for the other 2.
No. But if I could just say, I think it's important to have a Main Street site to evaluate because transportation is an issue. And today, there isn't any public transportation that I know of that goes up to the high school. So we would have to certainly include that in our transportation plan, and we should at some point. But we know that there is transportation on Main Street. But I think just to have that assessment, it may not be appropriate, and it may not work out. But at least we have looked at Main Street to see whether or not it would work out. I mean, that's, I don't think it would be a good thing to exclude it. I know, Heather, you have something to say.
Sam raised his hand as well. I just don't want the board to get too caught up in the additional, doing two locations at the high school site. My expectation is that it's not a tremendous amount of money. I'm hopeful that maybe working with Jill that we can find a way to fund that if that makes sense, if the board does want to take a look at a reuse site as well. We tried to develop that information and we don't have a firm number for you.
Sam?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think that those are 2 standalone buildings. And I think it's just a matter of a little bit of a tweak to come up with a second quote on what it's going to take and perhaps another list of trade-offs that you have to consider. But I want to echo what Rebecca's saying about the school administration site because the architect actually had a couple of different layouts, actually 3. 2 that didn't include the school administration building per se, and one that actually built an addition onto the back of it. And the Sandwich Road as a potential entrance site makes it feasible in a less congested road. Sandwich Road is not as heavy typically, certainly as 28 is, and the difficulties you have in getting to the Gus Candy Center. But guess what? It also gives you that transportation access because of the buses that go up and down Main Street, up and down 28, which includes T-Ticket Highway as well as Davis Straits and Main Street. So, I mean, I think it's worthwhile to leave the school administration site on there and let the architect come back and say, well, you could do it a lot less expensively and you don't have to worry about taking one of the active school program fields out of use, which is going to be a cost driver, So that it does give us an option that I think is worth looking at, and I think the traffic challenges can be allayed by putting an entrance off of Sandwich Road.
I think if we want to have the administration building as part of one of them, we have to say new building or add-on. I think that those are 2 different options, and we can't say, give us all of that. I think we'd have to say,
one or the other?
One or the other. And my feeling is, if we're talking new buildings, I would put the new building at the high school. Not try to put a new building at the administration building. Now you're just taking 2 bad things and putting them the same. And so if we were going to do the administration building, I would encourage it. It's only looking at the renovation of that because that does give us something different to compare to a new building. So we have your motion.
Right.
Did we get a second for it?
I don't want to amend my motion. And the reason is, I loved the administration building as an idea. I thought it was practical. I thought it, the public transportation, the 2 exits, I thought it made a lot of sense. No one in the public agreed with my thinking. And, everyone, was vehement about it. And so that's the reason why I'd like to keep my motion to just the 2 sites at the high school.
Well, let me just say, I think people see the administration building as it is, not as it could be. And I think when people look at something and they say, well, I don't like that. I mean, if I were looking at it, I would say, well, I don't like it either. But when I think of what it could be, That's what I'm really looking at, not as it is now. And the high school, I mean, it could be anything at the high school, so that's okay. So, but my concern about putting it at the high school is, and I'm not concerned about it, but one of the things that bothers me about the high school is the fact that people, unless we create a new bus service, people are going to have to drive there. Whereas they could use public transportation if it were on Main Street. I don't think we should exclude Main Street to look at. I think, and the only place right now to look at is the school administration building. And I just don't think that we should exclude Main Street and just leave. And it doesn't make sense to do two feasibility studies at the high school because, you know, one would suffice. Whether it was on that parcel or another parcel, what difference would it make?
Maybe we'll
in
save
many
some money.
respects? Well,
Another possibility,
So offer an
administration building.
amendment. Come on,
so
we
my
gotta move
amendment
things
to the motion is that we include the high school, whichever area you want to consider, and the school
We
administration
first have to
building.
vote on my motion, though.
No?
No, I'm amending your motion.
Yes?
Well, we haven't taken a vote on it.
Okay.
No?
All right,
So
well,
now we-
whatever,
we have
Chairman,
I'll second her amendment.
We have a motion and a second on Sue's amendment, Sue's motion for the two spots at the high school.
okay.
All those in favor, of just the two spots at the high school? All opposed? So, that motion did not pass.
Okay, so now it's a new motion.
So we could have a new motion. One thing to consider, the administration building, in the future, if the school numbers go way down, there's a possibility that the administration actually can move out and the senior center could then take over
Take
more
over.
space if
That's
they're
true.
saying we have
Yeah,
more
you
space.
have to think 20 years down the road.
You keep saying that that building is underutilized, but they run a daycare program in that building. I've been in and out of that building many times. There is not any vacant space in there. They have one large meeting room upstairs, and the meeting room that the finance committee uses is used during the day for childcare activities.
Is that in the summer? Or is that
No.
year-round?
But that's but there's 9 months when you're not going to be able to use it.
Sure. Whatever. All right, a new motion.
Are you going to make it?
No, you make it.
I move that, for this Phase 2 study, that we include the two sites at the high school and the school administration building site for the evaluation.
Well, discussion. No, there has to be a second. Discussion.
I second that.
Having two sites, why would we have two sites at the high school? Wouldn't that be triple the cost? I mean, double the cost? Wouldn't it cost the same? I mean, cost twice as much to do two parcels? Heather, I'm asking
It may
you.
cost more, but we don't know exactly how much more.
It would cost,
Yeah, because the traffic study is going to be similar. There may be some tweaks to the traffic study.
why would we want to evaluate two sites in one area? I mean, what's the rationale for that?
There are some major
What's the-
differences.
Your motion, what's the
There's some
rationale?
major differences between those two sites.
Mhm.
Oh.
There
Whether
is.
it's on Brick Hill Road
There
or
is.
Gifford Street, I think has some,
Mhm.
which field gets
Oh,
replaced.
so
and
the
what
two
place
sites
is-
are Brick Hill and way
They're
further
different.
down.
That's
Yeah,
right.
there's
Yeah.
north of
Oh,
that.
They
I
are,
see.
they're
It's
two
just
different
The
areas.
consequences of each one, I think, are
But
very
what do you
big.
have
Yeah.
to give up if you use Brick Hill? Don't you have to?
Another field.
The big field.
We have,
Another field.
you have, there's a trade-off on the fields, but there's also the traffic access issue as
Right.
well. And then there's the potential growth issue that Jim has brought up. So I think there's enough differences that they can look at and say, well, these are the factors you need to worry about. And let's hope the price is not significantly great. Because
So-
there's going to have to be standalone buildings there. They're not constrained by roads particularly. You know, they're going to have the same kind of parking challenges, but it'll be just a matter of reconfiguring. So I don't know that it's going to be double the cost. You know, so I don't think it's going to be. And, you know, they're going to do a traffic study that's going to include that whole area around the high school,
So your motion is the two sites at the high school and the,
school administration.
I'll second that.
I did.
Oh, you already did.
It's too late.
Could I ask for a clarification, Mr. Chairman? School administration building site, I think you suggested if that were to be selected, it would be as a joint use, a shared use of that building with an expansion, which was one of the options the architect had shown, as opposed to really utilizing school admin as a standalone building site. So would that be the scenario we would be pursuing, a shared use?
I
To
would
give you that
say with an
alternative?
add-on.
Correct, with an add-on.
And further clarification that the sites are the tennis court site and the Brick Kiln Road site at the high school.
So that's with the recommendation of these.
So that involves replacement or,
They both
It does.
It's really,
does.
it's really the field
Okay.
hockey
Right.
okay,
field site, and that,
okay.
yeah, that we understand which.
Can we have a vote?
So we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. Thank you all very much.
Thank
Next item is to announce the November 2015 town meeting schedule. Selectmen announced the town meeting on Monday, July 27th, 2015. Close the warrant Friday, September 4th, 2015. Selectmen vote the articles and execute the warrant Monday, September 14th. Publish the articles only on Friday, September 18th. Selectmen vote the article recommendations on Monday, October 5th.
Find it. Wait a second.
Publish the warrant with recommendations on Friday, October 16th. And the town meeting itself will be on Monday, November 9th. Yes, sir.
I have a concern. September 4th is before Labor Day, and that's earlier than most of the town committees are used to having to respond to. And I don't know whether there's a constraint, but I think it would be better for us to make it September 11th. That's a week later. That's the time relative to Labor Day when we normally close off submittal of any proposed articles for the warrant.
The number of days in between each one is legislated.
I'm asking, but
Couple of things that, just for discussion. The boards that are accustomed to putting articles in for the warrant will get this notification immediately. Planning board, finance committee, selectmen, they'll know the schedule. We always have a special town meeting at the November town meeting, so there'll be a special town meeting scheduled. Is that correct? Is it November that we have? No, it's April that we have the
April,
special.
been pretty well automatic.
So there's no scheduled
November's a
special.
possibility.
But what it does is it compresses the review time for the finance committee.
Yeah.
And since it's early in November, it pushes it earlier in September. And we have them take a look at the schedule and prepare it for us so that they have the maximum time to review articles for the warrant. And that's what drives the schedule.
And also, if I might interject, as the board recognizes, Labor Day is as late as it can be this year.
yes, it is.
And I believe we had the closing in 2014, the first Friday in September, but Labor Day was earlier. I think it was as early as it can be. So as Heather mentioned, you end up compressing the review schedule, which I know there's a lot of sensitivity on too. So Sam, your point is excellent.
I agree.
That we're all very concerned about that being before Labor Day. Our hope would be if the board would does so ordain that we would get the word out quickly to let everybody know that that's a constraint of the calendar because Labor Day is September 7th.
And why aren't we having town meetings so early in November? Because usually we have it like the 15th, the 17th.
It is a week early. I can't remember.
It's a week
why.
early? Yeah.
Wilson, I think there were some Jewish holidays and also David Vieira's schedule with.
Oh,
Yeah.
in the
legislature
house,
and
yeah,
everything
that's a
else.
big issue for him, I know, yeah. Oh, that's why. Interesting.
Rebecca?
And if there is a 3-day, are you running into Veterans Day?
We will not be, we'll be on
We
Thursday.
have to
Right.
jump and go first, yeah.
Okay.
All territory.
And when is, oh, Monday the 9th, so the 11th is Veterans Day.
That's Wednesday.
Yeah, it'd be Wednesday. So it's
Jump
just
and go to
Wednesday.
Thursday.
There's no like, it's Monday because it was Sunday or
No.
something like that.
No.
That makes sense.
Do you need a motion to approve it?
Yes,
So moved.
second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. Individual selectmen's report.
If I could, please, I know it's late, but I did attend, and I'm skipping most of them, but one of them is important, and that's I attended the kickoff meeting for the Lawrence Windows Project, and I just wanted to give a report because I know there's a lot of interest across the town, and maybe somebody will catch the rerun of this broadcast. It was a good meeting. We had the architect there and the project manager there. There were a lot of discussion on various issues. Just to list four of them, the trade-off of whether we really need hurricane-proof glass versus just thermal glass, and the state standards board review board basically has said one or the other, but the architects are going to take a look at it and see whether we can get by. The discussion basically was that you're not going to have kids in there during a hurricane, and if you're going to pay a fortune for 350 to 400 windows to be hurricane-proof, every one of them, well, that's going to be a lot of money compared to replacing one window that gets broken by a branch that gets thrown into the window. So they're going to be looking at that seriously, and that could bring back the cost of the project, by a significant amount of money. They talked about using muntins. I don't know whether you're familiar with that, but that's the lattice work that people put in windows that are thermal glass to make it look like they're small pane windows. Well, the architect suggested putting those just in the front of the building and not the back where nobody could see it anyway, but it gives it that historical look even more than what it is today. And then the question was, do you put them on the outside of the windows and have them snap in and snap out like many houses, or do you actually have the manufacturer put them inside between the two panes? They're working on it. There was a fair amount of discussion about eliminating the skylights in the shop and the art room for security reasons, because if somebody were on the roof, they could look down on students, and also because they're more expensive, and it would be a lot easier to eliminate it and just re-roof that area. The points that were made by both the school personnel was that the windows get so dirty that they don't really add light, and they put the windows in when they had incandescent lights, the old yellow ones. Now we have the fluorescent lights, and the building was upgraded, and so there's plenty of light in that area. And so anyway, the new principal,
Mary Gans.
Tom
sorry, no, different
Bushy,
Tom,
excuse
yeah.
me, newly appointed principal, said he will take it on it to investigate and actually get back to this group. And let's see. There's one more I want to mention, just because I think it needs to be a discussion within the larger community in case anybody wants to feed back. The architect suggested that one of the concerns was that we have 30-inch wide doors in the front of the school and in the auditorium doors. And for handicapped accessibility by wheelchairs, they really need to be 36-inch doors. Well, they pointed out that the very front of the building, the center entrance, has 5 to 7 steps, and so does the entrance to the auditorium, which are not handicapped accessible. But you do have handicapped accessible doors on either end of the front of the building that can take you in, and one of them can be used to actually enter the back of the auditorium, and so that could be an exit. And then in the auditorium, if you're facing the stage, on the left, right near the stage, that there's an exit right there that's handicapped accessible at all. So they're basically suggesting, don't get rid of the 30-inch doors, we'll upgrade them, but use them and not have to change that. And we don't have a really good way to put a 36-inch door in there without completely reconstructing everything. So they're saying, keep those there for those two areas, the entrance to the auditorium and the very central entrance to the main building. And then upgrade the other doors as part of it. But ways of basically cutting back on the costs, but also making sure that there are handicapped accessible access and egress routes as well. So those are the main topics that were discussed. But very good discussion, and I feel very confident in the people that are working this project. They're very constructive in their comments and bringing up both pros and cons in all the various issues we started. So I'll just mention that.
Well, I don't want to take up too much time either, but Sue and I both attended the executive committee meeting of the Cape Cod Selectmen's Association, and we looked at what kind of meetings we can plan for during the year, and everybody there really wanted to concentrate on regional issues, and so we're going to define what those are. There was everyone seemed to think that we could do a lot more if we collaborated together and try to resolve problems, and every single town trying to solve their own problems. And that came up. I attended the meeting down in Eastham. The Lieutenant Governor, Polito, she was here and I missed it. And so I went to the one down in Eastham with all the down capers. And it was a very interesting discussion, and they have a lot of the same issues that we have. But what she mentioned there, and I didn't know about it, and you may have heard if you went to the one here, was this program they have called Commonwealth Connect. There's $100 million available if communities want to come up with what they call best practices, and they need some money to be able to, further those along. And so I just thought if we want to think about what kind of best practices we might want to consider, there's the $100 million sitting up there that we could apply for, and she really encouraged communities to do that. But John Hodgson, who is a selectman in Orleans, he brought up the coastal issues. You're on the coastal group.
Right.
And he brought up the issue that they have with kelp and seaweed and all this stuff that washes up, and that they have it to deal with, as a town. And we always have the same issue here, that you can't, the Conservation Commission doesn't allow us to remove any of that stuff from the shoreline. But he was referring to Falmouth and how we share so many coastal issues that we should really attempt to work together on, and I'm not going to go into all the rest of it, but those were pretty much the highlights, unless you want to.
Ditto.
Okay.
Town manager's report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. 2 items. Just a reminder to mark our calendars for the Falmouth Police Department's annual participation in National Night Out.
Oh, yeah.
This will be held on Tuesday, August 4th, behind the police department, as it was last year. A very, very good event. Also, the Parks Department.
What are the times on that?
I believe it starts at 6:30. I didn't
6:30.
have that confirmed, but I will get back to the board and let you know for sure. I think it starts at 6:30.
5:30.
It's an evening, maybe.
They have hot dogs and hamburgers
little bit
and
earlier.
kids and.
Yeah, I thought it was
We went.
earlier.
It might be a little.
I
It
thought
might
it
be at
was earlier
5:30.
too.
I'll get that out to the board
Okay,
and
thank you.
we'll get the confirmation out.
I missed it.
Also, the Parks Department is in the process of installing a much-anticipated underground sprinkling system within Peg Noonan Park this summer. It's not been able to go forward previously, given the extreme and heavy use of the park grounds with regular events much of the year, and the short respite from regular intense weekly events in July and August is finally allowing this to go forward. It should result in a long-term sustained improvement in the quality of this very high-profile public area to everyone's benefit. And be assured that water use will be closely controlled by Rocky Gomes to ensure responsible and not excessive use. And that concludes my report.
One thing I must add is that the legislature is about to redo the Public Records Act. And some of the provisions in there are truly onerous for communities, huge cost increases. So this is a letter that Kate, what's her name?
Fitzpatrick.
Kate Fitzpatrick, who's the town manager in Natick, wrote, and Needham rather. And I got a copy of this today, and it's too late for us, we can't vote on it as a board and say we'll send a letter because it's not on the agenda. But I thought each of us could read it, and we could at least make our own letters or calls to our state reps, to Rep Madden and Vieira, and even to Vinnie DiMacedo, and say, look, we have a lot of concerns about this public records law, and we really don't want you to pass it, because they want to pass it pretty quickly before the end of the session. So we need, and I mean, it's going to cost, it's really the increase in cost for the towns and all the, anyway, you can read this.
Would it be before our next meeting? Because we could just have a vote at our next meeting.
No, that's 2 weeks from now.
So
and
it's going to be within 2 weeks.
No, the legislature may vote it by Friday.
Wow.
Yeah, so we need to get something
Got
to
it.
Vinnie and Dave and Tim this week, in the next couple of days.
Great.
That's it.
Can I just interject on that one item, if I may, Mr. Chairman? The board will note, as I have, that it's not unusual for the legislature to exempt themselves from this
they
standard.
do.
And some of the others that common knowledge suggests is a great idea for local government, but not such a great idea for state government, which I find is an interesting dichotomy. So
And state government does not have any of these provisions
Indeed,
apply to them.
open meeting.
Right, open
public
meeting law,
records,
none of that, yes, applies to the
Quite
legislature.
characteristic to advise local governments how you should operate, but to exempt themselves. Just thought I'd note that point of interesting information.
Motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Jeez,
Opposed?
I have a retirement board meeting in the morning.